August 29th, 1942, deep in the jungle mountains of Papua New Guinea, Private Bruce Kingsbury stood alone with a Bren light machine gun in his hands. Japanese soldiers were advancing fast, 200 of them, well-armed, pushing to break through Australian lines. The air was thick with smoke and gunfire, rain mixed with blood in the trenches. His unit had just suffered heavy casualties. His best friend had been hit. There was no one left to hold the line. So Bruce did something no one expected. He ran forward, alone, toward the enemy, toward the bullets. He sprayed the advancing soldiers with his Bren gun, mowing down wave after wave, buying his unit precious time. The Japanese began to retreat, but just as he turned to reload, a sniper's bullet struck him in the head. He died instantly, but his charge had saved the position, had saved lives, had changed the course of the battle. Private Bruce Kingsbury was just 24 years old. This is not the story of a general, or a decorated officer, or a commander behind maps. This is the story of an ordinary man with extraordinary courage who stood up when everyone else had fallen. This is the story of one of the bravest moments in Australian military history, and yet few remember his name. Until now. Bruce Steele Kingsbury was born on January 8, 1918, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. He grew up in the working-class suburb of Preston during the years of the Great Depression. His family ran a small real estate business. Money was tight, but Bruce never complained. He was known for his strong arms, quiet voice, and endless determination. He played football on muddy fields, helped his father with paperwork, and walked miles through the neighborhoods delivering mail. Even as a boy, he stood up for others. He hated bullies. He hated injustice. He left school early, like many young men at the time, to find work and support his family. He became a delivery man, then a railway worker, and later a sugarcane cutter in Queensland. It was hard labor, under the sun, with blisters and sweat, but Bruce never backed down from work. He never looked for praise. He only looked forward. In 1940, as the world spiraled into war, Bruce enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. He was 22 years old. He joined the 2nd/14th Infantry Battalion, a unit made up of men from all walks of life, farmers, mechanics, students, and office clerks like Bruce. His training began in Pukapunyal, a military camp in rural Victoria. There, Bruce transformed. He learned how to march in perfect step, fire Lee Enfield rifles, throw grenades, and survive in bush conditions with nothing but a canteen and a bayonet. He showed exceptional skill with the Bren light machine gun, a weapon he would one day carry into legend. Fellow soldiers remembered him as calm, disciplined, and fiercely loyal. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the strongest. But when things got tough, Bruce never cracked. In 1941, he was deployed to the Middle East. The 2nd 14 was stationed in Palestine and later in Syria, guarding against a potential German invasion. It was there, in the deserts and hills, that Bruce became hardened. He adapted to heat, fatigue, and long patrols. But he didn't see combat. Not yet. That would come soon, in a place far more brutal than sand and stone. A place with dense jungle, constant rain, disease, and an enemy that refused to retreat. That place was New Guinea. In early 1942, the Japanese began advancing south. They had taken Rabaul, threatened Port Moresby, and looked ready to invade Australia. The Kokoda Track, a narrow mountain trail through thick jungle, became the front line. And Bruce was sent there. His battalion landed in Port Moresby in August. From there, they hiked up into the Owen Stanley Ranges, a climb of nearly 3,000 meters through mud, rain, and jungle rot. They carried heavy packs, shared water bottles, and marched day after day up steep ridges and down slippery slopes. Men collapsed. Some vomited blood. Others simply broke down from exhaustion. But Bruce kept going. Every night he helped younger soldiers clean their weapons. He shared his rations. He carried the packs of wounded men without complaint. In the letters, he wrote home. He never mentioned the heat, the hunger, or the fear. He only asked if the family business was doing okay, and if the dog was still waiting by the fence. By late August 1942, his unit had reached the village of Isarava, near the center of the Kokoda Track. There, they prepared to face a Japanese force twice their size. They dug trenches, set up Bren gun positions, and waited in the mist. They were low on supplies. They were exhausted, but they were ready to fight. And Bruce Kingsbury was about to step into history. By August 26, 1942, the 2nd/14th Battalion had dug in around the jungle village of Isarava, a small clearing along the Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea. The Japanese were pushing hard from the north, advancing down the track with elite infantry, veterans of Malaya and Singapore, battle-hardened and confident. The Australians were tired, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition, but they knew what was at stake. If the Japanese broke through at Isarava, they would reach Port Moresby. If Port Moresby fell, Australia itself would be exposed. There was no backup, no retreat. The men at Isarava had to hold. The jungle was a nightmare. Thick vines blocked visibility. Mosquitoes swarmed every open wound. The heat was unbearable during the day, and the cold cut through bone at night. Rain came down in sheets, flooding foxholes, soaking every uniform and rusting every rifle. Yet the Australians held the line. Trenches were dug into the mud. Bren gun teams covered choke points. Snipers waited silently among tree trunks. And then, on the morning of August 27th, the Japanese attacked. They came screaming through the undergrowth, bayonets fixed, grenades in hand. The jungle erupted in noise, machine guns rattled, mortars exploded. Men shouted in terror and fury. The Australians held, but barely. Wave after wave of Japanese soldiers charged the positions. The defenders fought them back with rifles, grenades, and sheer willpower. By the evening, the line had bent, but it had not broken. Bruce Kingsbury fought alongside his platoon, helping to carry ammunition, repair weapons, and reinforce collapsing sections of the defense. He did not sleep that night. None of them did. They all knew what tomorrow would bring. On August 28th, the attacks resumed, stronger than before. The Japanese were now pressing the left flank, trying to outflank the Australians through the hills. Bruce's section was moved into reserve, resting for just a few hours before being called back into action. The rain returned. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Blood and mud mixed into a single red smear. Men fought at close range. Bayonets clashed. Voices screamed into the green silence. By the morning of August 29th, the situation had become critical. The Japanese had broken through part of the Australian line. An entire company had been pushed back. Positions were falling one by one. Commanders were shouting, calling for reinforcements. But there were none. Only a handful of men could be pulled from reserve. Bruce Kingsbury was among them. He was handed a Bren gun, a light machine gun capable of sustained fire but heavy, awkward, and usually operated by a team of two. But Bruce didn't wait. He knew they were out of time. He loaded the weapon, tightened his pack, and without saying a word, he ran forward into the chaos. At this point in the story, everything could have ended. The Japanese had the momentum. The Australians were scattered. But what Bruce Kingsbury did next would stop the advance cold. A single charge, one man, one weapon, against 200 enemies. Private Bruce Kingsbury sprinted forward through the underbrush, the Bren gun clutched tight in his arms. Mud clung to his boots. Bullets cracked through the trees. To his left and right, his comrades lay scattered, some wounded, some dead, others pinned down, unable to move. The Japanese were advancing fast, a coordinated assault designed to break the last defensive line. They were coming over the ridge in waves, bayonets fixed, shouting war cries that echoed through the jungle canopy. Bruce didn't wait for orders. He didn't hesitate. He raised his Bren gun, took aim, and opened fire. The sound was deafening. The Bren gun spat fire and lead at 500 rounds per minute, cutting through vines, branches, and bodies. The Japanese assault faltered. Men fell screaming. Others dove for cover, confused by the sudden and brutal resistance. Bruce kept moving forward, firing in short, accurate bursts, sweeping the weapon side to side as he advanced alone into enemy-held ground. No one followed him. Not yet. It was too dangerous. But Bruce didn't care. He moved with precision, firing from the hip, reloading from a satchel of magazines strapped across his chest. He passed fallen comrades, leapt over logs, and pressed forward toward the very ridge the enemy had just taken. He reached it. He cleared it. One man, clearing a ridge that had just been captured by dozens. His fire scattered the Japanese. They retreated, shocked by the ferocity. This gave his unit the opening they needed. A small group followed him up the slope, retaking the ground he had just cleared. Bruce turned back, smiled at the sight of his mates climbing the hill. And then, it happened. A single shot. A sniper hidden in the jungle took aim and fired. The bullet struck Bruce in the left temple. He collapsed instantly. The Bren gun fell from his hands, landing in the mud beside him. He was dead before he hit the ground. Silence followed. The jungle seemed to freeze. But the damage was done. Bruce's charge had broken the momentum of the enemy. It had bought time. It had rallied the defenders. His actions had likely saved dozens of lives, perhaps hundreds. The survivors of the 2nd 14 Battalion never forgot what they saw that day. They told stories of Bruce's charge around campfires, in hospitals, and in letters sent back home. One soldier later wrote, "He ran straight into the bullets, not to die, but to save us." Commanders wrote reports. The story was passed up the chain. What Bruce had done was more than bravery. It was legendary. On October 9, 1942, Private Bruce Kingsbury was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration for valor in the face of the enemy. He became the first Australian to receive the VC on Australian territory, and one of the few infantrymen to receive it in the Pacific Campaign. But he never knew. He never got to go home. He never saw peace. Today, his grave lies at Bomana War Cemetery near Port Moresby. A simple white headstone bears his name, and the words, "Greater love hath no man." Streets, buildings, and memorials now carry his name. But most Australians, and the world, have never heard of Bruce Kingsbury. They should. Because sometimes history is not changed by generals or presidents. Sometimes it's changed by a single man with a machine gun, a sense of duty, and the courage to run forward when everyone else is falling back. Bruce Kingsbury's name may be carved in stone, but his story lives in silence, in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, where his blood soaked the earth, and in the quiet bravery of soldiers who still wear the Australian uniform today. He wasn't a famous general. He didn't write books. He didn't give speeches. He was a delivery man, a sugarcane cutter, a rifleman from Preston, a soldier who did what needed to be done, even if it meant he wouldn't survive it. Today, few people walk the Kokoda Track. Fewer still visit Isarava. But for those who do, there is a memorial stone near the site where Bruce fell. It reads, "Courage, endurance, mateship, sacrifice." These were not just words. They were values lived by Bruce, by the men who followed him, and by the generation who fought for Australia's very survival. What Bruce Kingsbury did on August 29, 1942, is not just a story of war. It's a story of selflessness, of courage without hesitation, and of standing up when everything is falling apart. It reminds us that history is not just made in parliaments or palaces. Sometimes it is made in the mud, by a man no one expected, who picked up a gun and changed the course of a battle, and maybe a nation. The Victoria Cross awarded to Kingsbury now rests in the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. But his true legacy is not in medals. It's in the way his story is told, by veterans, by historians, by everyday Australians who believe in quiet heroism, and now, by you. If you've watched this far, you carry his memory too. You help keep it alive. So the next time someone tells you that one person can't make a difference, tell them about Bruce Kingsbury. Tell them about the man who ran into gunfire not for glory, not for medals, but because his friends needed him, because his country was calling, and because turning back was never an option. In memory of Private Bruce Steele Kingsbury, V.C. 1918 to 1942. Lest we forget. Bruce Kingsbury was not the only Australian to fight with unshakable courage along the Kokoda Track. His story is legendary, but his name is barely known, and he's not alone in that. Australia's military history is filled with forgotten heroes, men whose bravery never made the headlines, whose medals sit in drawers, whose graves are rarely visited. Take Private John Metzen, for example. Wounded in the Kokoda campaign, his leg shattered by enemy fire. He refused to be stretchered, didn't want to slow the retreat, so he asked his mates to give him crutches and crawled over 100 kilometers through the jungle, bleeding, starving, just to keep his unit moving. He died before rescue came, but his spirit became folklore to those who knew him. No movie, no statue, but a hero, just like Kingsbury. Then there's Sergeant Dick Whittington, photographed helping a wounded Papuan carrier, his arm around the man, a picture of compassion and strength. It became one of the most iconic war photos in Australian history, but most Australians don't even know his name. He survived Kokoda, only to be killed weeks later by a sniper in Sanananda. No grand funeral, just a wooden cross in the jungle. Or Captain Sam Templeton, who led the very first Australian unit to fight the Japanese in Papua. He died in the opening clash near Oivy Creek, his body never recovered. For years, rumors claimed he had been captured, tortured, and executed. His men fought on without him, inspired by his determination, but his legacy faded into whispers. These men were not looking for glory. They weren't fighting for medals. They fought for survival, for each other, for a home that felt a world away. They were soldiers of mud, sweat, and silence, often too young to vote, but old enough to die. The story of Bruce Kingsbury is powerful not just because of what he did, but because it reminds us of all the others, the nameless, the faceless, the forgotten. Those who didn't charge with a Bren gun, but held a line, carried a friend, whispered a prayer, or died without a witness. History remembers generals, but victory is built on privates, on Kingsbury, on Metzen, on Whittington, on Templeton, and thousands like them. Their names may be lost in time, but their courage echoes in every freedom we still enjoy. And so, when you tell the story of Bruce Kingsbury, you're also telling theirs. You're reminding the world that courage doesn't need to be loud or famous or filmed. Sometimes it just needs to do the right thing at the hardest possible moment. This story is not just about one man. It's about an entire generation. Lest we forget, all of them.